here that has been created, where it actually needs to go is up here. So I can just pull that up a little bit. Now I'm going to try and keep the next set of lines flowing along with that hard point that we saw earlier. So when I drag this up, I'm just sticking to that new point we've created, and I've got edge constraint toggle selected, even though it doesn't really matter at this point, but I do have it selected. I'm just going to connect those two together. Now if I go back to the edge selection mode, once again I've got all those edges selected that I wanted, and if I turn off edge constraint toggle, I can just pull those out. If you ever see things like that search box pop up, just know that that's not intentional. That's just kind of a mistake, just selecting the wrong hotkey. Now once again, now I've got to align it to this line here, because that's going to define the angle on that shoulder. Just taking a little bit of a look, making sure everything's all good. And you'll notice I haven't worried about the light inset at the moment. I'm just worried about trying to make sure that this shape is flowing correctly. And now that we've done that, I can just start kind of tying together a couple of those pieces. Because I've got not enough geometry here, I'm just going to go in and cut another loop. And now that I've cut that loop, I just want to go from side on and make sure that things are still flowing correctly. And at this point, I can probably even get rid of that point there. I just don't need it. And I'm just going to merge this point up here and then flow this along here. Now this lesson is a little bit too early to be getting into how to redirect topology loops and things like that. I will cover that in the next lesson. Like I was saying, I'm just trying to get us to that point where I can focus on those topics, and hopefully as you're modeling the car, you kind of won't need step-by-step instructions to do absolutely everything, because the workflow does accommodate beginners. I'm just going to get this point here. You'll notice that sometimes I don't connect from the earliest point, and the reason I'm going to connect from down here is because that's the point where we want topology to flow from. I don't want to have to cut down here and then connect it. So you may as well just keep the topology flowing from the most accurate point and then worry about cleaning things up like this later, as opposed to the other way around, cutting from here and then cleaning everything else up to match to that. And this is another instance where that annoying blueprint issue happens, where from front on we're aligned here, but from side on we're not. So in order to try and fix that, I can kind of push things on both angles and hope that kind of that's going to solve it. Okay, so now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start creating that little bit of a dip in the main front grille, or the main bonnet, and we're going to start incorporating that into the overall shape. So once again, I've just selected that loop, and it's selected a whole bunch of other stuff I don't need, so I'm just going to go in and unselect that, and we're going to unselect all the way up until the point that we created. And now what I'm going to do from front on is I'm just going to go a little bit down here, and I'm going to drag those points like that. Now this last point, I'm just going to lift back up to where I want it to be. And that's going to even out that topology. And I'm just going to select that same loop that we just started with, undo the same selection, and because that point is a hard point, and it's a very hard point, I'm just going to add a little bit of a chamfer to it to give it some hardness. Now for all these points along here, I'm just going to unselect everything I don't need again, turn on edge constraint, and I'm just going to slide those up a little bit. You can see when I slide it up to here, it starts overlapping, and that topology is not flowing really nicely. But when I get it to there and it starts flowing at the correct angle, I can pull it back down, and you've got a nice clean support loop. All these things don't worry, I'm not going to show you these things once. They pop up while modeling over and over again, and it's only a few little things like that to remember, but I will keep reiterating to you guys to just so you memorize things, and you memorize when to notice things like that happening. So now I can start to dip this point in, and same as usual, I've selected the loop, I unselect the points that I don't want. In this case, I'm going to go just to there, and now front on, I can kind of see that I'm a little bit too far in here on this point. And I think that's because, and it can get a little bit confusing, that's not actually a line on the car that has any kind of hard shape. That's just some rounded point that gets softened off, and the blueprint is describing that with a hard curve, but in reality there isn't actually anything in there. So what I need to do is I need to go back to the top and move these points in. Because you will make mistakes like that. I still make all those mistakes, and the idea is that if you do make a mistake, just correct it. No one's flawless. No one's going to do everything perfect or read the blueprints absolutely perfect. So I'm just going to select a couple of these edges, and possibly now is the time where I can move these in and just get things lining up a little bit nicer. So I've got edge constraint on, and this is where I'm just going in and just getting these getting this topology connecting up a little bit nicer. And you can see it's going to result in needing another edge loop along here. So now I can select all these and connect them cleanly. You can see here, for some reason, it's not bridging, and that's because I've accidentally selected this bonus edge there. And I've just connected that, and we're starting to get a little bit of shape showing up here. But obviously this point's pretty incorrect. So what I want to do to fix that is I just want to select it. Same as usual, just unselect those parts. And I'm just going to move this point down. And in. And now I can just connect this point and just cap it off. So it's a bit interesting now because we've got a really messy point, and this is where we kind of need to make sure that everything's still flowing correctly. So I'm just going to get the edge point out, I'm going to get the cut tool out, and I'm just going to connect a loop through here so that we do keep that continuity, and when we do remove this loop and add another loop in here, that we keep that all nice and clean. And you'll see what I've done there is I've accidentally missed one point, but I'm just going to zoom in and fix that up with target weld. That'll happen a lot. Okay. I have a feeling that this line is going to need quite a lot of modification because the blueprint doesn't actually give us much to work with when it comes to visualizing that point. But I'm just going to do my best to kind of visualize it as well as I can without these really high quality blueprints. But at the same time, it's good to remember that blueprints like this actually are quite high quality compared to some things you can get where they're just so out of whack you can't even use them. So now this line, now that I've connected this piece in between, I'm starting to see that that actually is a point, and I can use that to my advantage. So I'm going to connect those two up, and usually I'd have that mapped to G. It's not working for some reason, probably because things have crashed in the past. But I'm just going to go to Customize User Interface. I'm going to go to Connect. I'm going to go to Connect Vertex in Poly Mode, hit G and assign. And now when I hit G, those two will connect. And once again, we've got this issue where that topology just isn't flowing. So before I connect that, I'm just going to make sure that this line is lining up a little bit closer. And now I've got edge constraint toggle selected, and once again you'll notice that this edge is a little bit messy. So just once again, things I like to do to clean that is I can just use edge constraint toggle, slide it in, and when I slide it back off, that edge is very clean. And I've got control over the hardness there. And you can start to see that the shape of the car becomes a little bit more blocked out. At this point, it's probably a good idea to take a closer look at your model and double check for things like pinching, and just double check to see what you can do to kind of fix up and continue the cleanliness of this topology. So there's a couple of things here that kind of just aren't working that well that I'm going to take a little bit of a closer look at and start to clean up. Things like this line here, this point here that's pinching, we're just going to tidy up a little bit, and we're going to do that by cutting in that line that's running along the bonnet. So I'm just going to bring up my reference. You can see here, once again, I'm just taking a look, kind of analyzing how the curves are flowing, just taking a look at everything. And while you're modeling, you'll be doing the same thing. Hopefully you do have an extra screen or two so you can just continually look at this stuff like I've been doing the whole lesson. But we're just going to go in and we're just going to cut this line in. And then also we're going to add in the topology to keep this flowing up here. So often what I'll do is I'll just move it, and if edge constraint toggle isn't selected, I know that I can just quickly go Control ZC and that will snap it in. So it's all kind of real-time process where it's just wrong, hit C, slide it, and then hit C again straight away. I'm just going to cut through here. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure, and you can start to see a little bit of a pattern emerging, I always try and keep the distribution of polygons flowing nicely. So you can see here now things are just flowing a little bit better. And when I do go into this point and kind of raise it up a little bit, and when I do that, I just want to unselect this point because we know that's flat. We've got a bit nicer shape to deal with. Okay, so now I'm just going to quickly zoom in here and I'm going to start cutting that line. Now a lot of guys leave this stuff right till the end, but as you'll see, when I model, I try and stick to 3 basic guidelines. First I block out the main topology, then I fill the topology and connect those points, and then lastly I go in and start detailing them. If you stick to that workflow, you don't have to do everything on the car at once. You don't have to block out every edge. In fact, you can do the whole car just like I've been doing as you go, just as long as you stick to that process of keeping things first very simple, then blocking out, and then going into detail. So it doesn't matter if, for example, I just want to stop working on that piece that I was working on for a little bit, and I just want to go into this point here and start dragging out that edge loop. I can go in and make sure that I've got the topology flowing along the edge of the car here, flowing correctly. So what I'm going to do to make that happen is I'm going to go in, I'm going to cut an edge loop along here, and then I'm going to go into here, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because I'm going to move that point down and I'm going to select the cut tool again, and I'm just going to keep that point flowing. So now you can see we're starting to block out that shape there. Once again, I don't really worry about the topology so much as long as, at this point anyway, as long as I've got the topology flowing correctly, I'll worry about the shape of that flowing topology a little bit later. So you might need to just cut down here, and you can just experiment with that, whatever works for you. Now I'm going to connect that piece to there. From side on, you're going to see we're a little bit out of sync here. So I'm just going to drag that point back and get it sitting along the correct edge line. Okay, so now we've got an interesting point. At the front of the car, we want this topology to keep swinging in and flowing around. So what I'm going to do to make that happen is I'm just going to go from side on, and you can see at this point here, I'm just going to add another edge loop, and start connecting up. You can see it's just caused a little bit of a pinch there. When that happens, if I go back, what I've done is sometimes Max bugs out and you'll cut an edge and then it doesn't continue on. And when that happens, it just means that the edge is kind of snapped to an incorrect spot. So I'll get the connect tool and just snap that up together and then just keep cutting again. And now you can see we've got the edge loops flowing, and if I delete this point here and connect this point, select this point here and connect through, and I delete this point, just doing my best to keep that distribution of polygons even once again. What I can do now is I can kind of get rid of that point. When I get rid of this point, now if I drag both of these down, and this once again, it's a little bit complex, don't worry, I will show you how the theory behind all this, but it's just a little bit too complicated at the moment for the beginners. But now you can see we're starting to redirect the flow of topology to be a little bit more even. And now when I get up to this point here, I can keep that flowing. And without making any mistakes and in the shortest way possible, I've totally re-cleaned up that topology and everything should be flowing a lot nicer now. And we've got support loops where that light's going to go a little bit later. Just going to continue that down there. That we've got too much geometry here right now to deal with, and that will cause pinches. So we're going to have to work with that a little bit later and sort those issues out. But at least now the topology down here is much cleaner. And now I can kind of just drag out a point here. And what I might need to do is, you can see we've got our topology flowing correctly for a certain point, but it's not lining up to the wheel arc. So that's where you just need to readjust your wheel arc, delete this point, and then when I deleted that, I didn't hold control. When I hold control, it removes the vertices along with it. And you can see we're just starting to drag up a little bit here. And if I just connect this point now, and I bridge these 2 points, just going to connect that, push that to there, and I'll worry about that little point later. So now we've got a bunch of points, and I just want to get those even again. Just so everything's flowing. I'm going to bring this point down and just connect that there, and what that's going to do is it's just going to bridge all the points so that the only points we need to move are these 3 points in the middle. And this is the importance, and you're starting to see that when I do block out these shapes, how important it is to have these correct support loops laid down. So you can see when I select it, it's flowing all along with the car. So later on when we're modeling, those loops will remain selectable like that, and it just saves you so much time. And as we continue, and in the next part of the lesson, you'll also see that just shaping up more and more, and you'll see the benefit of this workflow, because it does take a lot of the guesswork out of trying to figure out what type of topology your car needs to flow with. Because if you block out these shapes here, it's just so much work cutting points and cleaning points like this, as opposed to just connecting them. So now I'm just going to connect all of these together. See, that's just not welding, so we might have a little bit of an issue here. So I'll just go to perspective, and I'm just going to remove that, If that's still not target welding, what I can do is I can cut along here, select that face, because sometimes you will get little buggy things like that occurring. Now I can cap that, select that, and remove it. And when you get pretty quick at modeling, all that will become very, very fast. So make sure that that's nice and evenly distributed. Remember, when you have that line going in between, it has to be the average of this line and this line. The inside has to be an average of that. So now from the front, I can just start to kind of shape things up a little bit. And you can see it's when you're working with that edge constraint toggle, it becomes a little bit of an issue when you start to work quickly, because you don't know, you can't remember if you've got it on or off or not. And because I'm recording this tutorial and I'm trying to focus on teaching you guys, little details like that kind of tend to become a bit more messy. Whereas if I was just modeling without any distractions and all I had was music on, things like that probably wouldn't happen near as much, because I'm focusing a lot more on the actual modeling part instead of the training part. So just keep that in mind. Don't get into the bad habit of, not remembering when you've turned edge constraint toggle on. That's a little bit annoying. Sorry about that. Now we're just going to come back to this point. And I know we got a little bit sidetracked there, but you can see I'm just going to zoom in on this point. And because I've connected that loop around, when I attach that point, it all just kind of works. But now we've got this point where it needs to stay hard, but at the same time, we don't want all these loops coming together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect this point up to here. I'm going to connect this point up to here. And now using this in between part, I can get rid of it and it just smooths off nice and clean like that. If I connect in here. I can start to kind of pull in that shape of the light. But I'm just going to leave that a little bit. Okay, so we were going to add that line in between here. So once again, I'm just going to go in and cut that together. And now that point there can get taken out. And when I do remove that point, I've just got to remember to keep the distance spacing, because if I go back here, that point, it's not even. So when I get rid of it, it automatically removes the other part too. So I just got to make sure that that's all just kind of continuing along. And the topology is as low res as possible. I'm going to add in another edge loop along the center here. Just going to hit C. And you can see what's happening again is if I need to go into configure viewport and disable selected with edge faces, because it was doing that thing again. And there you go. So I'm going to wrap the lesson up at this point, just because I feel like I don't want to overload you once again. And maybe even tomorrow I'll just go in and record another lesson, just continuing on from this process and just kind of breaking down the whole the way to keep everything clean. As you continue the model, you can see all the topologies flowing exactly over the lines, and you don't need so much geometry because we've placed all those edge loops in the most optimized way possible. That's due to modeling with the Turbo Smooth enabled, which is a huge bonus, and it just makes everything so much easier to understand when the geometry is so simple like this. So say for example I want to pull that down here, and I'm looking at the reference and this has just a little bit of shape to it. Because we've modeled things cleanly, I can select that loop and know that it's just going to be much easier to connect pieces in between. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up you'll notice I don't really use many tools. I just use cut, move, and target weld and connect. Those are basically the only tools you need, but occasionally there's going to be things where you can benefit from certain things, and one of those things in the graphite tools is the flow connect. And if I just select that, you'll just see it creates a little bit of roundness. We'll cover this in different lessons, but it's just a cool tool you can see the difference there. It's subtle, but when I go into loops, just pay attention to this area here. It just gives us that roundness. And for things like cars, that's going to be extremely important later when you go on to render it, because if you don't have those curves, the reflections aren't going to look very pretty at all. So once again, thanks heaps guys. I hope you're enjoying the course. I really appreciate it when you guys share your progress on the forums, because I want to better judge kind of what to expect from you guys and what you're capable of. So far I'm really loving what I'm seeing though, and it's really awesome, and I'm really motivated to keep this course rolling. Otherwise I wouldn't have done this lesson today. I would have just taken a rest. Thanks heaps guys. See you later.